My name is Reagan. 4 years ago, my husband's family called me useless because I couldn't have children, throwing me out of the house with one suitcase and a small check. That night, I sat at the bus station and swore I would survive. And one day come back not to beg for forgiveness but to make them silent. Today, I stepped off a private jet, beside the man who loves me more than his own life and our 2-year-old son gripping my hand. Right in front of the mansion that once threw me out, the same faces from years ago stood frozen. They didn't yet know I had returned not only with a new family, but with a secret that could shake their entire empire. Have you ever been written off as a failure, then quietly returned and stunned everyone? Leave a comment, hit like and subscribe because I'm going to tell you everything. I still remember that morning down to every detail. The harsh white light in the exam room, the sharp smell of disinfectant, Tyler's cold hand in mine as I held it for comfort. The doctor ended the appointment with a gentle sentence that hit like a stone. It's unlikely you'll conceive naturally. We left the hospital without saying a word to each other. The sharp clack of my heels echoed against the tile floor, mingling with the hiss of cold wind through the parking lot. Tyler opened the car door for me, but his eyes stayed fixed straight ahead, never once meeting mine. When we got back to the Harrison house, I found Margaret and Vanessa sitting in the grand living room. They stopped talking when we walked in, their eyes filled with curiosity and expectation. "Well?" Margaret asked, her tone as commanding as if she were questioning an employee. Tyler tossed his coat onto a chair, then calmly poured himself a drink. "It's not as simple as we thought," he said, keeping his voice even. Vanessa tilted her head. "Not as simple meaning?" I was about to explain, but Tyler cut me off. "Reagan has some health issues, so her chances of getting pregnant are very low." A few short words, but they sliced into me like a blade. Issues, as if I were a defective project, a faulty product. Margaret stared at me for a long moment, her gaze shifting from confusion to disappointment and finally to cold calculation. "I see. But there are still ways, aren't there? IVF, surrogacy, as long as there's a result." "Tyler and I will consider our options," I replied, forcing my voice to stay calm. But she had already turned away, not even bothering to hear the rest. From that day on, the atmosphere in the house shifted. The quiet dinners vanished, replaced by pointed conversations. "Eleanor's son and his wife just had twins," Margaret remarked one evening at the table. "Eleanor says being a grandmother is the greatest joy of her life." Vanessa smiled. "I'm sure I'll have a baby within 6 months of my wedding. I want Mom to hold her grandchild as soon as possible." They didn't have to say my name, but every word landed like an arrow straight to my chest. I forced a smile, my throat tight. Tyler sat there, eating calmly as if those words didn't exist. After a few months, he began skipping my doctor appointments. "I've got a meeting," or "this project can't wait." I went alone, sitting among women with round bellies, hiding the sting in my chest. The doctor reminded me the treatments would be expensive and exhausting. I pushed forward anyway, believing that if I tried hard enough, Tyler would see my worth wasn't only about having a child. But it was starting to feel like I was the only one fighting while he stepped back, one retreating step at a time. One evening when I suggested adoption, Tyler didn't look up from his stack of files. "My mother won't accept that. She wants a blood grandchild. You know that." It wasn't just a refusal, it was a reminder that in this house, Margaret's voice outweighed my happiness. I began to realize that the love Tyler and I once had was being worn down, not by illness, but by the choices he made to let others dictate our lives. Then one day at a family gathering, Margaret raised her glass to toast the future of the Harrison family, as Vanessa announced her engagement. She turned to me with a smile as thin as a blade. "Perhaps this house will soon have a baby to hold." I knew, even though she was looking at me, that sentence wasn't for me. It was a silent declaration that my place in this family was slipping. And the worst part was that Tyler didn't protest, didn't take my hand, didn't give me any signal that I still belonged. Back then, I had no idea that what I was feeling, the coldness, the distance, the sly jabs, was only the beginning of something much larger, a plan long in motion to remove me from their lives in a way that was legal and clean. In the months that followed, the distance between Tyler and me became undeniable. He began missing appointments, at first a few, claiming last-minute meetings, then almost entirely. I sat alone in the clinic, staring at the empty chair beside me, telling myself I was strong enough to handle it. But every time I walked out and saw other women leaving hand in hand with their husbands, I felt abandoned in a journey that was supposed to be shared. One evening, coming home from the hospital, I was stepping onto the porch when I caught Margaret's voice drifting from the study. Low, deliberate, calculating. The prenuptial agreement is strong enough to protect the family's assets. We just need to prove it. Tyler's reply was quiet but clear. I know. If we use health as the reason, there won't be any dispute. I froze, my hand gripping the cold railing. Every word scraped against my heart. They weren't talking about treatment or hope. They were planning how to remove me like a financial liability. I backed away, swallowing the lump in my throat, and left before they noticed. But the image of the two of them side by side discussing my fate like a business deal stayed burned into my mind. A few weeks later, something happened that confirmed my worst suspicions. That day, I got off work early after a last-minute cancellation. As soon as I stepped inside, I heard the rustle of papers from the living room. Vanessa was standing by the table, a thick folder in her hands along with a stack of photographs. When she saw me, she paused for a fraction of a second before her lips curved into a smug half-smile. "Home early, I see," she said lightly, her voice carrying a note of triumph. I walked closer, my eyes catching the photos on the table. Me sitting in the clinic's waiting room talking with the doctor, even holding test results. "What is this?" I asked, my voice low but trembling. Vanessa lifted a sheet from the folder and held it up. "Your prenup with my brother. It has a clause requiring full disclosure of health conditions before marriage. We have proof you didn't do that." I felt my face burn from both anger and shock. "What are you talking about? I didn't even know until..." Vanessa cut me off, her smile never fading. "The court won't care when you found out. All we need is to prove you withheld it. My mother's already spoken to the lawyer. This will be quick and clean." The clause was vague enough to twist. The timestamps on those photos were conveniently cropped, a setup I only understood later. She gathered the photos and papers neatly, like someone finishing an important task. I stood there, feeling the ground shift beneath my feet. "Why are you doing this?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady even as my eyes burned. Vanessa paused for a moment, looking straight at me. "Because you don't belong in this family. My brother needs someone who can give him what you can't." The words landed cold and sharp as ice. No hint of compassion, no trace of hesitation. That night, Tyler came home late. I sat in the kitchen waiting for him, a copy of the file Vanessa had left behind lying in front of me. When he walked in, I set it on the table and pushed it toward him. "When were you planning to tell me about this?" Tyler froze for a second, then let out a sigh. "Reagan, you know the situation. We've tried, but..." "I'm your wife, not a contract you can just terminate," I cut in, my heart pounding. He avoided my eyes. "My mother only wants what's best for the family. You should understand that." Understand? How could I possibly understand when the person I trusted most had sat at a table with his mother, plotting how to erase me from their lives like an outdated product? I walked away from the table, not wanting him to see my tears. But I knew that from that moment on, I could never trust him again. And worse, they were so well prepared that I couldn't predict their next move. That night, a light drizzle fell. A rain just heavy enough to make everything damp and cold, but not enough to wash away the sting of betrayal seeping into every breath I took. When I stepped into the dining room, the table was set with candles and wine to mark our third wedding anniversary. Tyler rose from his chair, but there was no smile, no happy anniversary, no flowers. Instead, he placed a thick envelope in front of me and sat back down, as if this had been arranged long ago. "What is this?" I asked, my fingers brushing the cold edge of the envelope. Tyler looked at me, his eyes stripped of warmth. "Divorce papers. You should read them." I let out a short laugh. "This is how you celebrate 3 years of marriage." He didn't answer, only pushed the envelope closer. "We can't keep going like this, Reagan. You know that." I opened the envelope, revealing pages crammed with text, the clauses of the prenup highlighted in glaring neon yellow, all ensuring I would walk away from this marriage with nothing. I looked up at him. "How long have you been planning this?" Tyler shrugged, as if he didn't want to admit it but couldn't be bothered to deny it. "This is what's best for both of us." The dining room door suddenly opened and Margaret walked in, her face perfectly composed. She carried a small suitcase which she set beside my chair. You should pack tonight, she said, her voice like she was giving orders to an employee. Amanda will call a taxi for you. I turned to Tyler, waiting for him to say something, anything, to stop this blatant humiliation. But he only took a sip of wine without looking at me. Margaret pulled a check from her wallet and placed it on the suitcase. $25. Enough to get you somewhere, for now. Every muscle in my body tensed with anger, but I knew nothing I said could change the situation right then. Thank you, I said quietly, lifting the suitcase. I wouldn't let them see me weak, wouldn't let them see me cry. When I stepped through the front doors of the Harrison estate, no one followed me out. The door closed behind me with a dry, final click, like a period at the end of a sentence. Outside, the sky was nearly black, the rain now falling harder. I pulled my thin coat tight around me and hurried down the drive toward the gate. A taxi was already waiting. The driver nodded, opened the trunk for my suitcase. In the car, I stared through the rain-blurred window at the warm golden light still glowing inside the mansion. In a few minutes, they would continue their dinner as if I had never existed. I gave the driver the address of a downtown bus station. Not because I had a plan, but because it was the only place I could sit and figure out my next move. The station was deserted. I chose a rain-damp plastic bench, set my suitcase beside me, and wrapped my arms around myself for warmth. Raindrops pattered against the metal awning, mixing with the distant hum of traffic. In my mind, images replayed like an old film. The wedding aisle lined with white flowers, my trusting eyes when I signed the prenup thinking love would protect me, the nights I prayed for good news, all now reduced to nothing but fading smoke. I knew that if I let them push me into the shadows and bury me there, I would truly disappear. But I also knew I was not the kind of woman who would lie still and take it. Sitting there, I felt something take shape in my chest, not despair but a cold, steady resolve. My story would not end here on a damp bench in a rainy bus station. I looked at the small suitcase beside me, all I had left. And I told myself, from these ruins I will build a new life. Not only to survive but to come back, and make them remember the name Reagan. My first rental was on the edge of the city, walls stained with damp patches, a window jammed shut, a sagging bed that creaked with every turn. The rent was cheap, but the trade-off was the constant noise from the street below and the musty smell that clung to my clothes. By day, I worked at a small laundromat down the street. The scent of detergent and the heat from the dryers seeped into my hair and skin. The work wasn't physically demanding, but the monotony and hours on my feet made my legs ache. The owner, Mrs. Lucy, was a woman of few words, but sometimes she'd slip me a few extra dollars for coffee. I knew it was her way of saying she appreciated my work. At night, I waited tables at a family diner that stayed open around the clock. From truck drivers passing through in the middle of the night to noisy college kids after parties, they all came through my section to the same greeting, "Welcome in." Some nights I was so tired I'd lean against the counter, pouring coffee with my eyes half closed. But thinking about the rent and the utility bills, I'd tell myself I couldn't afford to fall apart. One late winter night, delivering a to-go order to a regular in my old neighborhood, I saw an elderly woman collapse on the sidewalk, her purse spilling open, oranges rolling across the snow. I ran over and knelt beside her. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" I gently shook her shoulder. She didn't answer, but she was still breathing. I called 911, speaking to the dispatcher while taking off my coat to drape over her for warmth. A few minutes later, a black car pulled up. A young man jumped out, panic on his face. "Grandma." He rushed to her side, holding her hand. I stepped back to give him space, quickly explaining what had happened. "Thank you. I'm Evan Miller," he said, his voice still shaky. "If it weren't for you." I shook my head. Anyone would have done the same. But his eyes told me he would remember. And he did, because that freezing night became the start of a connection I never expected. A few weeks later, I applied for an administrative assistant position at a small building materials company. The office had only 7 people. Not glamorous but clean and quiet, exactly what I needed after endless shifts at the diner. The owner, Frank, asked me, "Have you ever done admin work before?" I was honest. No, but I learned fast. Maybe he saw the determination in my eyes because he nodded. "I'll give you a 1-month trial." I started with filing, data entry, and answering phones. But within weeks, I noticed how disorganized things were: duplicate files, missed appointments, late invoices. I spent my lunch breaks teaching myself to use free management software and then suggested we implement it. Frank looked surprised. You've only been here a short time and you're already coming up with this? But when he saw the results, he said, from now on you'll handle these tasks. Outside of work, I started a new routine. Every evening back in my rental room, I'd open my old laptop and watch free videos on personal finance and investing. I wrote down every term from index fund to dividend yield. I had never thought I could understand these things, but the more I learned, the more I realized it was the language of freedom. At first, I only dared to set aside $20 a week from my paycheck to buy a few low-priced stocks. The amount was so small no one would believe it mattered, but to me it was planting the first seeds. At the same time, I tried selling online, something I could do at night. I sourced a few handmade items from local artisans, took photos and posted them online. Orders were few, but every time I saw the sold notification, I felt like I was slowly breaking free from relying solely on a monthly paycheck. Over time, I started to feel different. My body was still sore after long work days, but my mind was no longer foggy about the future. I began to see the numbers in my account inch upward, new skills becoming habits, and most importantly, I started to believe I could decide my own path, without anyone else's permission. And I had no idea that all these tiny seeds, from late-night diner shifts to my first handful of shares, were quietly leading me to a turning point I never saw coming. I invested in that medical technology startup almost on instinct, after many nights of reading financial reports and observing how they spoke about their vision. They focused on technology for early diagnosis and treatment of fertility issues, a field both sensitive and full of potential. I wasn't thinking far ahead. I simply wanted to put my faith in something that could change the lives of women who had been through what I had. A few months later, on a Monday morning, I opened my email and nearly dropped my coffee. The startup had just signed an exclusive deal worth tens of millions with the Harrison Corporation. I read the press release over and over. The name Harrison glared from the screen like a cruel joke of fate. They had no idea that one of the major shareholders of their new partner was the very woman they'd thrown out of their house with $25 in her pocket. I quietly sold part of my shares when the price hit a record high. The profit was enough to finally do what I had been planning for a long time: start my own strategic consulting firm. I named it Miller Company, taking my current last name as a declaration that I had stepped into a different life. Miller Company served small businesses and ran a division dedicated to women after divorce, helping them rebuild careers, confidently manage their finances, and find new opportunities. I rented a small office, painted the walls soft blue, and hung quotes about inner strength. Whenever a new client walked in, I wanted them to feel they had entered a safe space, where no one judged them by their past. One Friday afternoon, I attended a seminar on women's rights after divorce, partly to network and partly to learn more about the real needs of the women I wanted to help. During the break, as I stood near the coffee table, I heard a familiar male voice behind me. "Reagan? Is that really you?" I turned around and could hardly believe my eyes. Evan Miller, the man who had rushed to his grandmother's side on that snowy night, the man who had thanked me in haste, was now standing in front of me, wearing a simple but refined suit, a thick folder in his hand. I laughed. "Evan, how long has it been since that winter night?" He smiled too, though his eyes still held surprise. "I'd planned to find you and thank you again, but I didn't expect to run into you here. What brings you to this seminar?" "I run a consulting firm. Part of my work is supporting women after divorce." I pointed to the logo on my name badge. Evan nodded. "I'm a human rights lawyer, specializing in family rights and domestic violence cases." "Sounds like we're on the same side." We sat down at an empty table in the corner, and our conversation shifted from small talk to genuine sharing. Evan told me about the cases he handled, women left with children and not a penny to their name. I told him about my journey from the damp rental room and 3 jobs a day to opening my own company. "You know," Evan said slowly, "what you did for my grandmother that night. It gave me more faith in the work I do. Now, hearing your story, I understand even more." His words brought back that night. The freezing snow, the beam of headlights, my hand holding the hand of a stranger. And now, that stranger was sitting across from me, as if the invisible thread between us had never broken. In the weeks that followed, Evan and I began collaborating. He referred clients to Miller Company who needed help reintegrating after divorce, and I helped them with business skills and financial management. We met at the office at a cafe near the courthouse, and sometimes spent hours in the library drafting plans for a free training program. Neither of us said it outright, but I could feel the connection growing. Not the rushed kind of romance, but something built on respect and understanding. Evan never asked about my past unless I wanted to share, and I didn't pry into the scars he chose to keep to himself. One evening, after a group session ended, we left the office together. The night air was cool, and the streetlights cast long golden streaks on the pavement. Evan turned to me. "Reagan, I think we can do more. Beyond handling individual cases, we could create a network so any woman abandoned can have a place to start over." I saw rare sincerity in his eyes. "You're reading my mind. I've been thinking about that too." And I knew in that moment, it wasn't only the start of a major project. It was a quiet turning point in my life, when someone who had once been a stranger on a cold winter night became an indispensable companion. Evan never asked me about Tyler or the Harrison family except for what I chose to share. He cared about who I was now, a woman building her work, living independently and trusting enough to start again. We dated slowly. No grand promises, just evenings cooking together, weekend walks around the lake, and endless conversations about projects we both cared about. I remember clearly the moment he held my hand in the kitchen as we prepared dinner for a group of women who had just completed a Miller Company program. "Reagan," he said, "you know, I don't care whether you can have children or not. We can adopt or not have kids at all. As long as we're together." I could only smile, but inside his words unlocked an invisible chain I'd carried for years. For so long, fertility, or rather the lack of it, had been used by others to define me. But with Evan, I was simply me with no conditions attached. One autumn morning, as the leaves turned gold and orange, I felt an unusual fatigue. At first, I thought it was from my packed work schedule. But when the nausea came at the same time every day, I began to suspect. I bought a pregnancy test on my way home, expecting nothing. But when 2 red lines appeared, I stood frozen in the bathroom, my hands trembling so badly I nearly dropped it. It felt like all the past disappointments rushed back at once. But this time the outcome was different. That evening, when Evan came home, he found me sitting at the dining table, restless. "What's going on?" he asked. I handed him the test without a word. He looked down, then back up, his eyes wide. Are you sure?" He immediately wrapped his arms around me, holding me tight as if afraid I'd vanish. "We're going to have a baby, Reagan," he whispered, his voice trembling with joy. 9 months later, Noah was born, healthy, with his father's blue eyes and my dark brown hair. The first time I held him, I cried, not from exhaustion or fear, but because in that moment, I knew every cruel label Margaret had once thrown at me had lost all its weight. In the first months, Evan and I took turns caring for him. The Miller Company office became the place where Noah grew up, staff taking turns holding him during my meetings, clients cuddling him whenever they stopped by. He became a living symbol of rebirth, not only for me but for many women who found hope in my story. Still, I kept everything from the Harrison family. I didn't block them on social media, but I revealed nothing personal. Not because I was afraid, but because I wanted the truth to come out at the right time, in my way. One evening, as I was feeding Noah, Evan asked, "Have you ever thought about, what if they knew you had a child?" "Yes. Many times. And it wasn't only about having a child. It was about being more successful than them, happier than them, without needing them." Evan sat down beside me, his hand resting on my shoulder. "I don't want your past coming back to hurt you. Evan, the worst damage they could ever do to me, they've already done. Now I'm only curious to see their faces if they ever come face to face with Noah." We laughed, but I knew that somewhere in both our minds we pictured it. Me walking into a room, my son in my arms, and them standing frozen. Noah grew quickly, and I kept expanding Miller Company, signing bigger contracts and launching long-term mentorship programs. Every step forward in my career pushed me further from the image of the woman who had once been thrown out of a house. And deep down, I began to feel something more clearly than ever. One day the silence between me and the Harrison family would end. But this time I would be the one to put the final period, on my own terms. That afternoon, as I was reviewing an expansion plan for our mentorship program, my assistant walked in with a white envelope embossed with a gold logo. "Special invitation, Mrs. Reagan," she said, placing it on my desk. I picked it up, my fingers brushing the words. Women's Leadership Gala, hosted by Vanessa Harrison. For a moment my heart dipped, then picked up speed. Vanessa, my former sister-in-law, now the president of the Women's Business Association, hosting a fundraising gala at the Harrison estate. I opened the invitation. In my head I read the words aloud. We are honored to invite Miller Company, one of the companies making a positive impact in the community, to our annual gala. The event will gather leading women executives to support women's startup initiatives. Not a single line acknowledged knowing me. Just a polite invite like any other business. That evening when Evan got home I handed him the letter. He read it, then looked up at me. Are you sure you want to go? I leaned against the table. Not to get revenge, but to show them how well I've lived. Then we'll go. But you know how shocked they'll be when they see Noah, right? I smiled faintly. That's exactly why it's worth it. Over the next few days I prepared as if I were planning a major deal. I chose a midnight blue silk gown with an elegant neckline and a tailored cut, enough to exude confidence without being flashy. I ordered custom Silverstone heels so that with each step into the hall, the light would catch. I also scheduled fittings for Evan and Noah. Evan's suit was tailored from Italian charcoal fabric, perfect to the stitch. For Noah, I had a miniature suit made in the same color as his father's with a black bow tie, enough to make anyone smile. The night before the gala I sat in my home office reviewing the schedule. We would take our own car to the airport, then use the private jet membership I had bought long ago to fly to the city where the Harrison estate stood. From there, a limousine would take us straight to the main gate. Evan leaned on the doorway watching me. You're plotting the entrance like a military campaign. Half joking, half serious, I said, because it is. We'll arrive, say nothing, and everyone will understand. On the morning of the gala, Noah ran around the house, delighted with his new shoes. I knelt to fix his tie. Son, today we're going to a place where I used to live. But don't worry, no one can touch us, I whispered. Evan stepped forward, adjusting his jacket, and kissed my forehead. Ready, Reagan? Ready. The flight was short and quiet. I sat by the window watching the clouds drift, remembering myself 4 years ago, huddled at a bus station with one suitcase, not knowing what tomorrow would bring. And now I was returning not to beg for a place, but to walk in as an honored guest. When the limousine turned onto the road leading to the Harrison estate, I saw rows of lights along the drive, tree shadows casting lace-like patterns on the pavement. Outside the entrance, guests stepped out of luxury cars, photographers snapping non-stop. The driver opened the door. I stepped out first. The night air was crisp, cameras clicking like rainfall. Flashlights lit my face, reflecting off the silver in my carefully chosen earrings. Evan followed, tall and confident. He helped Noah down, the boy looking around curiously before taking my hand. We walked up the stone steps I had once descended in tears, dragging a small suitcase. Now each step was a statement. I was no longer the woman thrown out. I was Reagan Miller, and I chose to be here. Laughter and conversations spilled from the hall, warm light glowing through the wide-open doors. My heartbeat was steady but strong, ready for what would happen the moment we crossed the threshold. When the grand doors opened, Evan, Noah, and I stepped into the main hall. Golden light from crystal chandeliers poured down onto the polished marble floor. The hum of conversation slowed, heads turning toward us. Tyler, standing at the far end with several men in tuxedos, froze. His wine glass tilted, red liquid sloshing toward the rim. His eyes slid from my face to Evan's hand holding mine, then stopped on Noah, my son in his tiny suit, taking in the room with curiosity. Margaret stood nearby, her fingers white around a champagne glass. Her gaze locked on Noah, so fixed she didn't notice her glass trembling. Vanessa couldn't mask her reaction at all. The glass slipped from her fingers, shattering on the floor, champagne pooling like a stain on the perfect marble. The sharp crack echoed in the sudden quiet, making several guests turn. We walked slowly, unhurried, as if there was no one else in the room. When we were only a few steps from Margaret and Tyler, I stopped, offering a calm but resolute smile. Tyler stammered, almost whispering, "Is that?" I tilted my head. "My son. And he's part of the story you tried to erase." Margaret swallowed hard, her eyes still on Noah, while Vanessa clumsily bent to gather the shards of glass. Just then, A sharply dressed woman in her 40s approached me with a microphone, a photographer trailing her. I recognized her as the business columnist for a major city paper. "Mrs. Miller," she began, "we'd love to hear your thoughts on your recent success with your investment in Medivance Tech, the medical technology company that signed an exclusive deal worth tens of millions last year." Oh, what a coincidence. Medivance Tech happens to be the largest supplier to the Harrison Corporation. And if I'm not mistaken, that contract is set to expire in a few months. Perhaps we should talk about that. I didn't look their way, but I knew my words were like a blade of ice. The truth none of the Harrisons had imagined, that I held a stake in a key partner of their empire, was now public in a crowded room. Cameras flashed rapidly. A few guests smiled discreetly as if they'd just witnessed a chessboard turn in a single move. Evan's hand pressed lightly at my back, signaling that was enough. I nodded, thanked the reporter, and walked past Margaret and Tyler without a glance. The mix of expensive perfume and spilled champagne only sharpened the sense of distance between us now. Not a few feet, but a lifetime. Behind me, someone called my name, but the music had resumed, drowning it out. We stepped onto the balcony where the city lights stretched into the distance. Noah rested his head on my shoulder, his small hands gripping my collar for comfort. Evan murmured, "Just for me, they'll never forget tonight." I took his hand, my eyes fixed on the velvet dark sky, calm and proud just like I felt. We left the gala exactly 90 minutes after we had arrived. No arguments, no public confrontations. But I knew every glance, every camera flash, every whispered exchange had said enough. In the limousine, Noah slept soundly in his car seat. Streetlights slid across the glass, brushing over his peaceful face. Evan's hand held mine, warm, steady. "You didn't only survive," he said slowly. "You rewrote your story." I leaned my head on his shoulder, no words needed. He was right. The story they thought had ended in my failure was still being written, and the ending was mine. Nearly 2 years later, Miller Company officially launched the Phoenix Fund, a program to help women achieve financial independence after divorce. The name Phoenix was my choice, inspired by the image of a bird reborn from ashes, just as I had risen from my darkest days. On launch day, the office was packed, former clients, partners, and donors who believed in the mission. When I stepped up to speak, my eyes found familiar faces. Women who had once come here burdened, now standing strong. After the ceremony, I took Noah, now nearly 4, on a tour of the new office. He darted between bright meeting rooms, curious about the white boards covered in notes, then stopped before the phoenix painting in the lobby. "Mom, why does this bird have fire?" Noah asked. I crouched to his level, brushing his soft hair. "Because it went through hard things, but it didn't give up. It stood up again, stronger than before. Like me, and like all the people I've helped." Noah thought for a moment, then smiled. "Then I'll have fire too." That night, as I tucked him into bed, he wrapped his arms around my neck and asked, "Mom, what's happiness?" I looked into his clear eyes and answered, "Happiness isn't being accepted by everyone. It's accepting yourself. When you can do that, no one can take it away." He nodded as if understanding something and closed his eyes. One weekend evening, I stayed late at the office. Outside, the city glowed like a sea of stars. I stood at the big window, a cool cup of tea in my hand, silently taking in the skyline, thinking of the path from that cold bus station bench to this moment. The phone on my desk buzzed. A text from an unknown number. I opened it. "We need to talk about the contract." A clear feeling rose in me, not fear but calm curiosity. I set the cup down and looked back at the city. Lights reflected in my eyes, bright and steady. I knew my story with the Harrison family wasn't truly over. What do you think? If one day the people who turned their backs on you had to face the very truth they once tried to bury, would you walk away, or walk in head high and show them how much you've changed? For me, not every return is about revenge. Sometimes, it's simply to prove to yourself that you've truly moved on, that you've rewritten your story your way. If this story resonates with you, share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to know what you would do in my place. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories about family, about love, and about the strength to rise again after days you thought you couldn't.